shooting stars, rock and rolling through the cool guitars. Chuck's got the questions, digging so sharp, peeling back layers, hitting the heart. Chuck Shoot podcast, blowing your mind. Every topic.
Yeah, and you've done the what's that guy's name? The Timcast? That's
I've done
a big
that a
show
bunch.
too, right?
Yeah, I did that originally right after Kenosha, and then I don't know. I've been on like 15 times.
That's amazing. Does that help?
Doesn't sell. I
exposure
sold
and
way
stuff?
more books with Megan than I did with.
Oh,
Tim.
really?
Yeah.
Is this book? This book is out for because I know I got.
Yeah, it's out.
Okay, it's out
Yeah.
for sale, so people can buy now. Okay, that's great. So
Yeah, it came out on election day, and then the second one will come out about 6 months after this summer sometime.
Okay. Oh, what's the next one called?
Riot Diet 2.
Oh, okay, just part 2. Okay.
It's just a sequel. It's the same story on the other side of the political spectrum. And instead of ending with Kenosha, it ends with January 6th. So.
Oh, okay. And then, yeah, so are you going to have the, I don't even know what you call them, like the Tesla riots? Like, this is.
Yeah,
I've
been covering them in DC. They've been peaceful in DC.
Okay.
And I can definitely talk about that. Like, just it's a much older population than during BLM.
Yeah.
A lot more like federal employees and stuff like that. But
Okay.
yeah, there's been a lot of protests. But they've been largely, other than the firebombing of the Tesla dealerships, largely peaceful.
Well, there's a lot of Keen Keen and what else are they doing to the Tesla? Yeah, they're firing them and they're lighting the chargers on fire and like
seen
a lot of crazy
Tesla,
footage.
A lot of DC Teslas with like "I'm not with Elon" stickers on them now, so they don't get vandalized.
Yeah, because a lot of people that bought Teslas, liberal.
Exactly, and so is Elon.
Right.
And
Right.
I mean, it's indicative of the shifting sands of the paradigm right now. You know.
So then, what is going on? Because there's the other thing that I see a lot of, the phrase "paid protesters." So how many protesters of Kenosha and Tesla and January?
Yeah.
How many are these paid or people riling it up?
Only a few. I mean, number one, people aren't willing to admit that on camera. But number two, it would only be a small handful. It's the bigger question is less sexy, but it is at the heart of it is who's actually funding these things at the organizational level.
Yes.
You know, so not necessarily that they're paid, but they're giving them reimbursements for travel. They're getting the permits. They're, organizing these things nationwide in 50 different states. There's a central organization there. There's like Indivisible, a lot, George Soros. There was the accusation that he funded riots in 2020. He wasn't funding the riots. He was funding the bail funds that got people out for, committing violent crimes during that time. And all the prosecutors who were basically giving carte blanche to the protesters in these liberal cities were also, their campaigns were largely funded by the Open Society Foundation. So it's, yeah.
Okay. Can you sum up or do you even know, what is the point of all these? Because I've been an American citizen for my whole life, 47 years. And I do remember, I'm from Seattle, and I do remember the Seattle protests in like the 90s. There was some sort of world trade thing, and that was kind of crazy. And that was the first time I'd seen like protests on TV. And I don't really watch the news, but it was such a big story that you couldn't miss it, right? And then it was like, oh, okay, that's weird. And then takes like 20 years later, now all of a sudden there's protests just all the time. And there were so many people that protested in the Tesla one because it was on my newsfeed on Facebook. Like every other post was like, hands off, blah, 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 we're here. And I'm like, okay, I don't understand. What is the point of this? Like, I'm not saying it's good or bad. I don't understand the point of all these protests. I've never had my mind changed by a cardboard sign or a protest, or it's never really swayed what I think. So is it doing anything, or I don't understand?
Well, I cited the WTO protests in the Chaz chapter, the Seattle chapter, because there was the Teamsters and the Turtles who were teamed up. And that's like, these blue collar truck drivers with the environmentalists. And that coalition of protesters goes to show how, back then what a Democrat was. And, blue collar workers and like far lefty, crunchy hippie types. But the crazy thing about my analysis of that, when I went back and looked at all the news reports, was the fact that the New York Times was pro free trade with, the Thomas Friedmans writing on the front page. And they wrote an article claiming that the protesters threw Molotov cocktails and had to issue a correction later on saying that it didn't take place. And that is also indicative of the paradigm shift where the New York Times back then was going in with an agenda that the protesters were wrong. And then you fast forward to 2020 and it's completely flipped on its head. Also, the corporations that were the ire of the WTO protests, who were going to benefit from these free trade policies under, that Clinton was ushering in, they uh, were not in the crosshairs in 2020. They were actually, committing money to Black Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter related causes. And so you saw this whole flipping where corporate culture was backing, Republicans in the 80s under Reagan. And then through the 90s, Clinton adopted a lot of the free trade policies that George Bush had pushed forth in his term. And then Bush too inherited them, and Obama really perpetuated a lot of these free trade policies. So over the course of that 20-year period that we're talking about between 1999 and end of 1999 and 2020, you had kind of the merging of the two parties into corporatocracy that really gave Trump the opportunity to win in 16 and 24 because the working class no longer felt like they were represented by the Democrat Party in the way that they had been in the past. And so, like, regardless of what you think about Trump, there is a paradigm shift that's taking place right now, whereby a lot of the working class voters who were lifelong Democrats, many of whom voted for Obama, are now voting for Trump, and that's really hard for the media to wrap their heads around. That this orange man bad is getting votes from people who were Democrats for their entire lives. But if you look at the 2024 numbers, he made further inroads with minorities, with the working class, with the young people. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that Kamala Harris ran on a platform of business as usual in DC, whereas Trump in 16 and in 24 ran as a change candidate. So I even quote Bernie Sanders in the book saying, "Oh, they're going to ship 3 million Chinese jobs over to China. Working class votes, working class guys are getting jobs shipped overseas." And if that taken out of context, you might think that was a Trump quote in 2024. And so the far left, the pro labor left, and MAGA right actually have a lot in common as far as what they view to be the selling out of the American worker.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of those clips. I've seen Bernie and I think Schumer and Pelosi, like a bunch of those Democrats, like years ago, talking about free trade and the problems with it and shipping the jobs and all this. And now, like, they're doing and it's the same with immigration, by the way. If you look at
yeah, the
immigration,
nativists were the original.
Obama,
were far left
yeah,
nativists were like
Obama's
you're lowering wages.
Obama did the most deportations, and it's funny, the Tom Hooman guy, whatever that guy,
Yeah, Tom Homan.
He seems a little bit kind of crazy, like a little bit too into his job. That guy worked for Obama, and Obama gave him an award for deporting so many people or something. So, I mean, it's interesting. I feel like you kind of know what the Republicans stand for, and then it seems like the Democrats, like, it's a little bit of confusion. It just seems like they are just the opposite of whatever Trump is doing. And I think that is very strange to me, rather than just holding to your principles and going, oh, like, because there's got to be some things that, you know what, actually, we both agree on this. Let's work together. And you're just not seeing any of that in America anymore. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Again, I didn't
No,
follow
you're right.
much,
It's reactionary. And I think both the right and the left are guilty of abandoning their principles in favor of, well, if they're doing that, then we're going to do this. But I also talk about that in the book. Moving into DC in 2008, I was knocking on doors for Obama in Virginia. I was pro free speech and anti-war. And I went from NBC News to Mark Levin, who's a conservative radio guy. And over the course of, the 8 years from 2008 to 2016, those views of being pro free speech and anti-war really, like, kind of changed parties.
Yeah, right.
And I'm not saying that I would ascribe myself to being right, but I still hold those principles, and it seems to me that the Democrats abandon a lot of that, in favor of kind of what the uniparty wants to do. But you're right; it's very hard. Their platform has been eroded so much by Trump's change platform that they're largely just the Never Trump Party now.
Yeah, no, I agree exactly. I'm the same way. with the anti-war and the free speech. And then I think the third thing that I always felt that I'm a registered independent, just so everybody, because
Yeah,
everyone
same
always
here.
tries to label me, and I know you've said the same thing. They try to label you
Oh yeah.
MAGA, or they try to
Oh yeah.
label you a commie or whatever. But like you're
Yep.
in the
I've
middle,
been
right?
called all of the above.
Yeah, me too. So I'm an independent, but like a lot of my family thinks I'm like this red hat Trumper
Mhm.
because of a lot of my stances that are I feel like are pretty moderate. And so free speech and what was the other thing you said? Anti-war. Okay, and then
Anti-war,
the
yeah.
third thing that I always thought was something that I was very far left on was like we need way more regulations on food on the FDA. I think the FDA is
Hmm.
terrible. They do zero
Yeah. And
work.
all the medical industrial
Yeah,
complex
the pharmaceutical
critiquing that,
companies. I was like, that's
yeah.
a left thing, isn't it? And it's like, no,
Yeah.
that's now conservative.
Well,
What?
and the irony there is like that during 2020 and during the whole COVID scare, Trump was pro-vaccine. Trump was right out there on the podium, right behind Anthony
Yes.
Fauci.
Hmm.
But the fact of the matter is, going back to what I was talking about originally, it's really a question of who is skeptical of the system writ large. And I do think that the right is taking, like with the term deep state, that was coined by a guy um, who Peter Dale Scott. He's a Canadian from Berkeley, California. I mean, he moved to Berkeley, California. He wrote all about 9/11, and he wrote about the deep state under the Patriot Act and Bush. And I was reading books in the early 2000s by this guy Peter Dale Scott, and he coined the phrase deep state. And so that was a phrase that was coming from the skeptical left, who was skeptical of the entire military industrial complex that was being built up after 9/11. And now it's like some right wing term. And I think the same thing applies to the medical industrial complex, where, big pharma, the corporate oligarchy that exists there and their special interests in DC, and how much, DC is intertwined with what's going on with our medical system. Um, yeah, it's now, I guess that's a right thing. It used to be like a hippie granola thing.
Yeah. It's weird. It does seem like the parties have switched. Like all those like old school Democrats, like the anti-war, like hippie people, like it
Mhm.
seems like I don't know that they're necessarily all Republicans now, but it seems like their values align more. But then I think there's a lot of people that think that they're Democrat and they're because they're that old school hippie anti-war. But
Mhm.
I'm like, I think they're on the wrong team, or they
Yeah,
should
they
just
just
be
have personal
independent.
animus for the orange man,
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
that really
And
colors so
billionaires.
much.
That's what
Yeah.
I tried because I tried to figure out. I was like, okay, what is this Tesla? So I was asking people on Twitter, which was a terrible idea, asking what is Tesla protest about? And like people were like, billionaires don't pay their fair share. And I'm like, okay, but like, there's a way more billionaires on the left than the right, right? And
Yeah.
they raised way more money. And there's a
Mhm.
lot more money on the left, or there was. I don't know. Now maybe it's shifted.
Yeah.
I know
Well,
there's people like Bezos and Zuckerberg that they're like, oh, okay, the money. If everyone's Republican, I'm a Republican too now.
yes, and that's the shifting of the sands there, which is like, I think in 2016 it was very counterculture to be MAGA. And I mean, the numbers showed that. Out at BLM, like I have a moment in chapter 5 when I'm in New York where there are 5,000 people protesting on behalf of BLM. They have the entire corporate media establishment behind them, and aside from maybe Fox News and New York Post, but there's one Trump supporter out at this protest, with a Trump sign, and I'm like, who here is counterculture? But now in 2024, that Trump won the popular vote, you do see Silicon Valley has done this 180, and they're like, oh yeah, actually conservatives are allowed on our platforms. Like, yeah, sorry about all that stuff in 2016. And I was working at Daily Caller in
Yeah.
Trump's first term, and I mean, objectively speaking, I was running a video outlet, so a lot of people on my team were lefties, but objectively speaking, we were getting censored. We were having our content, the reach was limited on places like
Hmm.
Facebook, because if you put the words stolen an election side by side in 2020, after the election, you'd get a strike. But if you did that in 2016 with Russia, 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 that was totally fair game. So there now Silicon Valley doing this about face it's interesting to me, because they were definitely stepping on the scale previously. But I think the more that if history, the last 8 years have shown anything, it's the more that you try to force this stuff into the dark corners of the internet, the more traction that it's going to gain, because it's like people look at it and say, wait, why is it that we weren't allowed to question anything regarding this brand new vaccine that they were rolling out? Like, aren't we allowed to do that in the town square? whether or not you, whatever, wherever you stand on the medical front, it's like at least you should agree that we should be able to have a conversation out in the light, out in our town squares, today's
Yeah.
town squares.
No,
So
I agree. I thought the best clip I think I saw was Jimmy Dore's bit about doing your own research. Like, it's like that used to be called
yeah,
reading, like when you go buy
yeah,
the
critical
car, it's
thinking
like,
was like a classical liberal Enlightenment
yeah.
value, you know.
And now that's like a right wing
Yeah.
nutcase thing. I don't know. It's a very strange world that we live in, and I feel like the media just throws fuel on the fire
Hmm.
from both ends. Like if you're
Oh
on
yeah.
Fox News, it's gonna rile you up, and if you're on MSNBC, it's gonna rile up the other side. So
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
do you think there's any way out of this, or is this just the world now? Because it's weird to me that it's kind of like my buddy was saying, sports is like year round now. Like, like
Hmm.
NBA is like 9 months, and then there's like the draft,
Yeah.
free agency, like there's just like a year round thing. And I feel like that's politics because you saw AOC and Bernie Sanders uh, on the campaign trail. Well, there's
Hmm.
not a presidential election for 4 years, there's not a midterm for two, and they're already out there. I mean, it's a little early, don't you think?
It definitely is, but I also think, we go through ebbs and flows in American history as far as political participation goes, and as far as how much the respective two-party system is riled up on this side or that. So that's why I cite William Jennings Bryan in 1896, because during the Gilded Age, the late 1800s, the Republicans dominated the presidency for like 30, 40 years. And the Democrat Party was the party of the South. And that shift started, it was initiated by William Jennings Bryan, who lost to McKinley, but he was this 36-year-old dark horse candidate who ran on a platform of he had a famous speech at the DNC called the Cross of Gold speech, where he said, "You guys are crucifying the average American worker and farmer on this gold standard, this cross of gold, because it didn't allow them the capital to keep their businesses running or to, start new businesses and be entrepreneurial." And so FDR, 30 years later, kind of inherited that platform of converting the Democrat Party from the party of the South to the party of the working class. So I think if you look back in history, we've been through these kinds of moments of really broad inequality between the rich and the poor, and also secondarily, that economic strife providing an opportunity for this party or that party to reinvent their platform and to appeal to the worker who's been getting screwed over for X number of decades.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like the workers of because I remember like in the 80s and 90s, it just seemed like people could buy a house. Like most families lived in a house, maybe it wasn't like a
Mhm.
mansion or whatever, and big house, but you'd be able to buy like a 2 or 3, 4 bedroom house and have your family and it just seems like that is going away. Like it's hard to get a house, and then a lot of people don't even own cars. I used to drive for Uber, and I'd pick up people would have their groceries and stuff and their family.
Yeah.
They don't own a car, so they're using Uber to get groceries and do their errands.
Yeah. I mean, kids like my age and younger, I'm 35, they view that as like, I mean, I'm like, I have to have my car. That's my independence in my view.
Me too. Yeah,
And
me too.
yeah. And so I have to have a vehicle of some sort. Didn't have one for like 6 months in DC, and I was pulling my hair out, stuck in the city. But they view that, the car insurance and the maintenance and all that. They're just like, I would rather just get a zip car when I want to go out of town and, Uber every other time or whatever, use the metro. But I do think that's like a lot of what we're witnessing right now, the clash between urban and rural voters, between voters who have college education and who don't, between men and women. There's a lot of different lifestyles that are, I guess, one is more copacetic with the modern information age than the other, and that's why I think a lot of these rural voters and younger people who feel like they can't buy a house are getting activated to go to the polls.
Yeah. Do you think their strategy is to? I mean, do they think that they will be able to afford? Because I've heard people that are like Bernie Sanders supporters are like, no, if Bernie
Mhm.
wins, then we're all going to be able to afford houses and cars. And I'm like, I don't think that's accurate because he's talking more of a democratic socialism, which if you look at those countries, a lot of those countries, the people don't own cars and
Mhm.
houses and stuff. I mean, yes, they have free healthcare and they have a living wage and all this other stuff, but they don't own a lot of the stuff. They're much more dependent on
Yeah.
banks and stuff.
Well, and in both books, there's this term like, Western civilization. I think that America is really different from the old world, from what we would call the old West, because I view it not as like Republican and Democrat as the two traditions that kind of drive America forward, because obviously those oscillate based on which classes and which parts of society each party represents. It's really the hillbillies and the Puritans. So like the Puritans came over, they settled the Mass Bay colonies and the coastal cities. They created the laws. They established a system of law and order. And then the hillbillies, the Scots Irish originally, they came in. They were poor, so they went out to the frontier and they carved out the frontier. And so the hillbillies, they want to remain independent, and they kind of don't like, over regulation. They don't like the government telling them what to do. And then the Puritans, like, they're law abiding, and they say, hey, follow the law. Um, it's not like specific to any race so much as it is, hey, I want my freedom or I want my safety. Those are really the two. I think you saw that play out in the streets in 2020 for sure.
Yeah, but I think that the problem is that it's like the definition of freedom, right? Because I think the
Yeah,
right
yeah,
claims, oh, we have more freedom, more freedom of speech, freedom to
yeah,
own a firearm, and then the left says, well, no, we're the freedom party because you can have an abortion and you can have a sex change,
yeah,
and like we're more for trans rights and all these other things. And so it's an interesting like dichotomy. I don't
yeah.
know.
It's not cut and dry as far as
Yeah,
whether or not one party represents the hillbillies or the Puritans more so. Obviously, the Puritans are the ones who say, oh, no gay marriage because they're, religious and dogmatic. And so they're socially conservative. So obviously, yeah, we're kind of split right now where a lot of people, I think also though, MAGA is not like Reagan's Republican Party, where they are less concerned with social issues. And I'll say that with a caveat. um, this whole culture war around gender ideology, I think, has been a major galvanizing point where, um, obviously the Christians are saying, this is too far, but then like a lot of uh, the average, like especially like white male voters. I mean, look at how they voted in 2024. Not a lot of them are Christian, or like, oh, I don't believe um, that, you know, gay or transgender people should have the right to this or that. They're more like, hey, I don't want you to tell me that I have to use this new gender language or whatever. They're like, I just want to return to normalcy. So I think there's a lot at play as far as like which party represents what right now. But I will say that the MAGA wing is not overtly that Christian conservative bloc that it was originally. Obviously, they brought in a lot of other groups as well. So it's a strange coalition. And then the billionaires is a whole nother thing with Elon coming in and
yeah.
Zuckerberg. And
Well, they try to. It seems like the media tries to say that Republicans and MAGA and all that and Trump hate gay people, and they're going to put gay people in camps and all this stuff. And again, people think I'm MAGA, and they think I don't like gay people or something. I'm like, I've had tons of gay people on my show. I love gay people. Like I love all people, but it is weird because there's this thing. Like I don't know if you saw the clip last night. Bernie Sanders on Anderson Cooper, and this woman. They said,
yeah,
oh, okay,
the
she has a
pronouns.
question, and then
Yeah.
she goes, actually, I use they them pronouns, and Bernie
Mhm.
Sanders makes this face like
Yeah.
you're so,
Yeah.
so confused, and so I think there is this thing where it's like some of that stuff has gone too far for the average American voter. I mean, wouldn't you agree? Like just
Yeah. And I think, well, and then
yeah,
it all
most
goes back to
Republicans
like,
are not anti-gay that I know.
yeah, I would agree with that. And, I've worked across the spectrum in media. I've worked on the left, I've worked on the right. I've been out at protests on the right, extreme right, and on the extreme left. And I think, generally, if you actually like meet these people, I mean, the Proud Boys uh, are an extreme right group, but there were like, they were called racist, but they were founded by a black guy, or not founded, they were run by a black guy, Enrique Tarrio, half black, half Puerto Rican or Dominican, no, Cuban, sorry. But um, that the idea that like Dave Rubin is a prominent conservative MAGA
Mhm.
influencer, and he's gay and
Another
he's met
former
with Trump.
Democrat,
Yeah, and Trump is a former Democrat, exactly.
and
So
Elon and Tulsi Gabbard and
yeah,
RFK, and yeah.
yeah. So certainly Trump got the Christian vote because he was viewed as, okay, well, he's more conservative than the other option. But I don't think Trump, if you look at his track record, as he's appointed conservative judges, but if you look at his own life, I mean, the dude was remarried multiple times. And obviously, there's accusations of indiscretions. He's, from New York and
And he
was,
used to be pro-choice. Now he says he's pro-life, but for the
yeah,
exceptions.
he's backtracked on that for sure.
Yeah, it is just interesting to see. So do you feel like, because that was a big thing that I every time I see it, I kind of laugh and I kind of go, okay, I'm not saying there's zero white supremacy in America, but when Joe Biden says white supremacy is the biggest problem in America, and like, I guess I just don't see it personally. Maybe it's where I live, or maybe it's the people I'm interacting with online. I'm just not seeing a lot of quote unquote white supremacists. Like,
Yeah,
you're out there in the streets, you're out in
I've seen
the
him. I've
riots.
seen him. Patriot
Right.
Front is a new one that they were out
How
in
many of those
DC.
are feds, by the way?
That's funny. I actually the last time they were out in DC, I went up to him and it was when Kash Patel was up for his FBI directorship for the nomination. And I asked them, "Do you guys support Kash Patel for FBI director?" And they're like, "No, we don't, because he's Indian." And I was like, "Well, he's American, but okay, he's ethnically." And they were like, "We only believe in," I mean, literally white supremacists. They were like, "We believe in European white America." Um, you know, with that being said, it used to be like the ADL who was defending these guys to go out in the streets. And now obviously the ADL and the left are, I guess, less on the pro free speech side and more on the pro censorship side. But as far as like white supremacy being, this resurgence under Trump, I do think that from what I see online, from what I saw in the replies when I interviewed those guys, yes, they are emboldened by Trump. But Joe Biden, saying that that's the biggest threat in America is detached from reality. And as far as people's everyday lives go, and secondarily, the whole BLM thing, it was tied around this idea that Black people were indiscriminately targeted at much, much higher numbers than white Americans. Historically, that has been the case. But if you look at like numbers from the 2010s since Obama came into office, it's simply not the case as far as unarmed individuals being killed by officers based on their race. And you saw Joe Biden's FBI was cooking the numbers. They made white defined as also Hispanic. And so the FBI was saying, oh, look at how high the murder rate is under, for white Americans. Like, look, this points back to this narrative that white supremacy is and white people are extremely violent. But the fact of the matter is they rolled in Hispanics with the whites to make it look like the whites were more violent. So like that's the problem that we face today is that, okay, we're going to say that white supremacy is the worst threat to America because Trump and January 6th, it ties into our best opposition to, keeping him out of office and keeping his supporters down. But like, if you look at, I mean, even after 4 years of Joe Biden saying that, more Black Americans voted for Trump than any Republican candidate in 48 years. And so, like I was saying earlier, the more that you try to pull the wool over the eyes of the public with the internet age, you can only do that for so long. The same thing that was happening at the border. Oh, immigration's not a problem. The border's not a problem. Well, that finally became a problem when they showed up by the millions in Democrat-run cities across the country, like New York. And people were finally like, oh, now it's affecting me in my backyard. I don't want a migrant shelter in next to my dog park in my dog park in Williamsburg. So now all of a sudden I'm mad about it. But I was at the border in 2021 watching people come in through the gaps in the border wall and asking them, every single one said, yeah, I'm coming now because Biden is president. And I know that I'll have a much easier time getting into the country. I don't blame those people for taking that we're open for business sign and coming up. I mean, actually, they made tremendous sacrifice to do it. And there's something very American about taking tremendous risk and sacrifice to venture to a place where you think you will have opportunity. So all that to say, the Democrats have been screaming America is this terrible place. It's racist. It's horrible. But then at the same time, demonstrating through what happened at the southern border that people still want to come here for a reason. And these
Here,
people are largely brown people.
yeah,
And so like, if it's that bad, then why are they
right.
coming here?
So what
So
is, because
yeah.
just numbers wise, I was trying to Google it. I can't find it, but I feel like I looked it up before, or maybe I need to type in a different number. But like, how many people? Like, I know white supremacy is not zero Americans, but
Mhm.
like, how many people we talking here? Because I mean, this is like less than 1% of the population is a white supremacist, right? Or I mean, I don't know. Do you know
I
that?
mean, yeah, if you look at Patriot Front, it's not a big group.
Yeah.
They're in
And
the
they look like feds
thousands,
because they're all
maybe
wearing
10,000.
khakis and polo shirts, which is exactly how feds dress. I mean, it's a little suspicious.
It's weird, and this is the same thing with Antifa or with the Proud Boys. It's like most of those people, the overwhelming majority, are just truly disaffected people who have, and I'm not justifying the ideologies, I'm not justifying those people coming to the streets, but to understand why it's happening, you have to examine these questions. So people are always like, oh, like you're saying that just because they're poor that they can, go out and riot. I'm like, no, I'm not saying that, but I am saying like overwhelming majority of the people that I saw out in the streets for BLM wearing black bloc with umbrellas and gas masks, fighting against police. They're younger kids who feel like they don't have the job prospects that their parents did. They're living in their parents' basements, like the stereotype. That's actually true, and I document that in the book. But then also on the right, it's the same thing. It's a bunch of, younger Americans, and in this case, white ones who are like, oh, our jobs are being taken because of unfettered immigration. And so on both sides, all it takes is like a couple of people infiltrating those groups to, you know, sway things in one direction or another. So historically, whether it's the Black Panthers or it's the Proud Boys or it's Antifa or the Patriot Front, it'd be naive to think that our domestic law enforcement agencies and potentially like places like the CIA who do operate domestically, as history turns out, it'd be naive to think that they're not doing some degree of monitoring and infiltrating. And when I was in Kenosha in August of 2020, it didn't come out until the trial for Kyle Rittenhouse for the murder trial, which he was acquitted on all charges. But turned out in the trial that they were flying an FBI Cessna above us with infrared cameras, and they also had a drone that was flying over the shooting, and we didn't learn about it until a year and some months later. But if they have intelligence in the sky, they definitely have it on the ground too. So my question is if they have that intelligence and the whole city is burning, why are they allowing that to take place?
That
Why
is
are there not more
very,
resources put in
yeah,
place?
that is very suspect because, and then they say white supremacy is the bigger problem, but didn't more damage damage done and people lose their lives because of the BLM protests as opposed to the white supremacy protests or whatever?
Yeah, and you see definitely. I mean, if you look at in terms of the total damage, it's billions of dollars. Minneapolis itself there were multiple deaths, and that was the uh, worst riot in terms of singular riot in terms of property damage, other than Rodney King. And some other ones after MLK's assassination also rivaled it. But if you look at like 1968 versus today, and you look at race relations in America, by every metric, we're on a better standing than we were back then. And so when the Democrat Party since the 60s and since the Great Society had been the party of civil rights, but now I think, you know, you see ways in which Democrat-run cities across America have not seen, like places like Baltimore or Detroit, they haven't seen the positive benefits of voting Democrat for 40 years. And so, yeah, a lot of people are like stepping outside the box, specifically black men in the last election who are saying, well, hasn't been working going this way, so I'm just going to go whatever's not that. And it's really hard for like lefties to wrap their heads around that. But ultimately, people have the right to vote the way they want, and the polls went the way they did. I think just because the Democrats weren't really offering much opportunity to change the way the gravy train is going.
Yeah, well, it does seem like both sides of the political spectrum, the politicians are going to promise things and try, their job is not, unfortunately, it should be the job to get things done and make policies that better the average American, but I feel like their jobs are more to get reelected. That seems to be, to
Oh
me,
yeah.
what their job. I mean, like I said, AOC and Bernie Sanders are already campaigning.
Yeah, living in DC for 17 years, I've become acutely aware of, what it takes to get reelected. And it all comes down to they spend a huge amount of their time, these congressmen, um, soliciting donors and raising money. I mean, a massive, much more time than they should be spending.
Yeah.
And a lot of that comes back to the special interests, whether it's the pharmaceutical lobby or it's the gun lobby or the military industrial lobby or big tech. All of these really, really powerful forces are pulling at the purse strings of these congressional candidates. And it has a lot more to do with the money of those special interests getting reelected, that is, than it does, really like bringing positive change for your constituents.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that, yeah, that's all those things scare me. I mean, I think I've heard that the two most profitable things are war and sick people. Like if I
Yeah.
feel like that is how a lot of where our money is going. A lot of
Yeah.
it.
And people always cite, and um, I have my own thoughts on, guns. I almost got shot by Kyle Rittenhouse. The first bullet went past my legs. But the laws are written the way they are. I'm not from Wisconsin. I didn't, vote for anybody who wrote the laws there, but I was there. And so I had to testify on what I saw objectively, regardless of what the laws say. But with respect to gun control, everybody says, oh, the gun control lobby has so much power in DC. Well, in actuality, the pharmaceutical lobby, uh, and the military industrial lobby and the lobby for things like Silicon Valley, like for Google, they're all throwing way, 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 way more money. We're talking by like, if you look up the top lobbies in America, gun control is way down the list. Or places like the NRA and stuff like that. These groups that lobby on behalf of gun control. So uh, it's, I guess, people have an idea in their head about what it is that keeps the keeps the pockets greased in DC. And like we were talking about earlier, if you look at war and our healthcare, I mean, those are the two most powerful systems. And um, I don't know. I've always been skeptical. My dad was a doctor. My brother's a doctor. But for that reason and having a look on the inside, I've always been very skeptical of what it is that motivates doctors. Like, why do they do invasive surgery? Well, it makes them a lot more money than a more therapeutic approach that's non-invasive. And the same goes for, drugs.
Yeah. Well, we spend more on healthcare than any other country, and we're the sickest. So that doesn't
Yeah.
really make any sense.
It does, though, if you look at,
I mean, in
if
terms
you
of
look
making
at
money, it makes
the
sense. It's
profit
great.
incentives. Yeah,
Yeah, profit,
exactly.
it makes sense. But in terms of like, yeah, I mean, I like to go to the doctor. I like to get their opinion, and then I like to kind of make my own decision. Because I think a lot of people will just they'll take the pill, they'll go to the
Mhm.
pill, and or they'll go to the surgery. And I think a lot of times you can do other things to, or a lot of it too is preventative care. There's no talk
Yeah,
of preventative care ever. No one ever talks about
no,
that. Even when
exactly.
COVID hit, I was like, okay, this is when they're going to get on and they're going to say,
Yeah,
like, okay, if you guys exercise and you get sunshine and you eat right,
yeah,
you're gonna be able to handle this virus better. They never
yeah.
said. I watched a ton
Mhm.
of those press conferences. I never heard Fauci or any of those guys saying anything like that.
Yeah, that's correct. That's definitely true. And it's also, um, I guess the most interesting thing for me during COVID was the way in which, you know, this idea of sit down and shut up and lock down and listen to, put your mask on and shut up and follow the rules, that was endorsed wholesale by in all these Democrat cities that I was visiting for the BLM stuff, and Bill de Blasio was saying things like protesting for Black lives is effectively what he said is 400 years of slavery is more important than religious services. So he's saying you can't go out to church, but you can go out to protest because that's more important. And it's just surprising for me because like I always viewed the Democrat Party as being skeptical of the big government telling you how to um, what to do with your body.
Yeah, it does seem like there's some hypocrisy there for sure. Like it's confusing too, because I had a lot of friends. I'm from Seattle, but I live in Arizona now, and I had a lot of friends that they were real strict in Washington and being locked down. And these are
Yeah.
people who are very liberal, and they were not happy about the lockdowns, and they were also not happy about that you needed a vaccine to go out to dinner because they were skeptical of
Mhm.
the vaccine. These are people that are, again, they're more like hippie liberal, like natural organic foods and all
Yeah.
this. They didn't want to inject an experimental vaccine into their veins so that of a disease that probably wasn't going to kill them anyway. So it was a little bit
Yeah.
confusing. I
I,
think they almost seemed MAGA to me, and I was like, this is
so
weird. This is a
I
weird.
often in DC, I used to wear fake news flops until I lost them just to get like a reaction. Like you learn a lot. It's almost like a straw poll. So I had this hat that says unvaxxed and overtaxed. And it's funny because it kind of like uh between those two statements, people will take a lot of times the lefties will say, "Oh, unvaxxed, I appreciate that." But I don't think we're overtaxed. Or the other day at Trader Joe's, this guy was like, "What does that mean, unvaxxed, overtaxed?" And I was like, "Oh, just like I'm skeptical of the medical industrial complex, and I think we're overtaxed in DC." And he was like, "Well, I agree with the overtaxed part." And so, like, you're right. Like people, like they don't even really know where they stand right now. They're just like, okay, yeah, if it's Trump, it's awesome, and if it's Trump, it's terrible. And like nobody's thinking critically outside the box and being like, let me view this without those preconceived notions about Orange Man good or Orange Man bad.
Well, I just wish that both sides could look at the other side and say, okay, let's be objective. You know what? Oh, you guys actually did something really good here. I like this. Oh, you know what? Like you did
Mhm.
something really, and they would look at their own party too and go, you know what? We fucked up. Like this was a bad thing.
Yeah, no,
And
they're
they
not going to do that.
cannot do that. It is so
Didn't do it in
bizarre to me.
2016. Yeah.
You know what people are going to say. Like I have people that are diehard Republican and diehard Democrat. I already know what their stance is on. I don't have to ask them questions because I know they're just going to side with their party on every question I ask them.
Yeah, it's true. No, I mean, having been in DC for as long as I have, it's really strange because I feel like I haven't changed on my views, but the way that I'm viewed from the outside, like during 2020, you know, it's like people just want to put you in a box. And that
Yeah.
didn't used to be the case in the same way that it is now. Like there was a much blurrier line between red and blue than there is now. And now it's like part of your tribal identity because I mean, just look at our local communities, our local newspapers. They're being eroded, and everybody's moving to big cities, and everybody's because they don't have their local community and paper to read every day and what's going on in that community, and the neighbors don't wave to each other anymore. It's like you attribute your identity with your national political tribe rather than your local community.
It's so true. And how much do you think of that is manufactured? Because I know you talk about, you used to work at MSNBC,
Mhm.
and Tucker Carlson started there along with
Yeah,
Rachel Maddow. They
yeah,
were trained by the same person. I don't think a lot of
yeah.
people know that. They were both trained
Rachel
by the
Maddow and
same
Tucker are friends,
person. Yes. And so
Mhm.
this is all, it's like almost WWE to me.
or
I
they
mean,
were
if you
friends.
see Trump talking to Obama and Chuck Schumer and kind of palling around with these people, and you're like, wait a minute, I thought they hated
Hmm.
each other.
Well, in the second book, I go through more of the MAGA stuff. I went to the border. I went to Rudy Giuliani's apartment to pick up Hunter Biden's laptop in October before the election.
Wait, you
Um,
went to well, you picked up the
yeah, I went to Rudy's apartment.
what the
That
fuck?
chapter
I
is
didn't
called
know
"From
this
Looting."
story.
That chapter is called "From Looting to Rudy." I don't
Is
want to
this,
give
this
too
is the
much
next
away, but
book?
basically, what's that?
This is the next book?
Yeah, the next
Okay.
book.
Wow.
Because it picks up after Kenosha, so it's the MAGA side of things, leading up to the election, and there's still some BLM stuff in there, but it really tailed off after Kenosha and after the Summer of Love. But yeah, in October, um, we had interviewed Rudy at his apartment right after the New York Post story, and I'd been trying to lobby to get the laptop, and I just finished recording mass looting in Philadelphia, and that chapter is called "From Looting to Rudy," because his assistant texted me the morning after. We're literally filming the rubble of these riots in this shopping mall in Philadelphia, and she's like, "Oh, you want to come to get the laptop? Copy of the laptop on a hard drive." And I was like, "Yep." And so I drove straight from the looting in Philadelphia to New York, and I got the Hunter Biden laptop and drove back to the caller. But that's another thing where it's like, if your political ideation was like Trump can't get back into office, then you had to say it's Russian disinformation. But
But you saw it firsthand.
yeah, but I saw it, and we verified the smoking gun email of 10% for the big guy. We verified that that was a legitimate email that was sent from Hunter Biden to the recipients, the metadata, the recipients. We confirmed all that. So it wasn't just like made up by the Russians, as the narrative said from the 51 intelligence officials that came out right before the election. That story, which was not hacked. Hunter literally handed it over his own laptop, signed a document that said, "Hey, you can go into my laptop and repair it." And then he didn't pick it up. And the guy contacted him multiple times, contacted the FBI, and then finally contacted Rudy Giuliani, the laptop repairman. But that censorship of the story from the Twitter files and all that we've gathered, it was just like overtly had nothing to do with the reality of what was on that laptop. It had to do with keeping Trump out of office and keeping this Russian collusion narrative going. And, you know, it's like this, I cite many instances over the course of that time period where the Trump administration and Trump himself acted like a nutbag idiot. But at the same time, I'm not going to like sit there and say like, oh yeah, you know, just because, you know, it kept Trump out of office, then it was totally true and yada yada yada. It's like if you look at that with fresh eyes, it's crazy, especially with all the evidence that's come out since then. So yeah, but the second book, all that to go back to what I was saying earlier about the left turning on Trump. You mentioned him with Obama and Schumer. I went to the Saturday Night Live episode uh, a year before he won in November of 2015 when Saturday Night Live had him on, and everybody was buddy buddy with him because he was a joke. There were 17 candidates. Nobody thought he was going to win. I saw the same thing I saw in 2024. I was like, he's the change candidate. Hillary's not. This guy's going to win because people are mad. And they still want things changed. Even after Obama promised hope and change, it doesn't look like much change after the '08 financial crisis as far as the way that things are run in this country and who's benefiting. So Trump, you know, obviously the left turned their back on him. He all of a sudden became this horrible racist once he became the primary candidate and finally won. But what I track in the second book, at the beginning of the first book, I'm talking to Jeff Zucker, asking him that challenging question at NBC when he was the president, and I was a production assistant on my third day.
That was funny.
And Zucker, soon after that, went to CNN. The most watched day in CNN's history was January 6th. And Jeff Zucker was the head of NBC Entertainment when The Apprentice picked Trump as their go-to billionaire guy, and they made him into that the myth of Trump as the phenomenal businessman was born in the fake boardroom that they built to make Trump Tower look a lot more glamorous than it was for the Apprentice reality TV show. So I go through all that in the second book as far as like Trump as this reality TV star that was birthed by Jeff Zucker. And then all of a sudden, Jeff Zucker in 2016, the highest rating CNN had to date was 2016 when they were never Trumping and everybody was freaking out and they were giving him all this free airtime. So it really, in a weird way, the left, in the way that they turn their back on Trump and in the way that they apoplectically scream the five alarm fire for years, they gave birth to Trump, you know, as this like modern day businessman tycoon.
It is weird. Like, do you think that the strategy is starting to backfire? I mean, obviously they've lost.
Yeah, definitely.
Like this whole like white supremacist, Trump is a white supremacist. Everyone that voted for Trump is a Nazi, which would mean that a majority of the country is Nazis. Like, I think that's a little bit hard to swallow for a lot of people. Like, you think that because again, it used to be the peace loving hippie, like that is like, that's something I can get behind. But this whole like everybody's a white supremacist and I use they them pronouns, it's a little bit confusing for the average American.
Yeah, and you have the same thing on the right where everybody's a commie. If you're, you know, have socialist leanings or believe in a strong federal government, you know, that doesn't make you a communist. With that being said, I've interviewed actual communists who have a hammer and sickle flag, you know, and actual fascist Nazis who believe that white people, those groups do exist.
Sure.
But as far as like the name calling that's going on across the aisle, it's like people just use these pejoratives. I just wish they would use terms like authoritarian, because Trump certainly has authoritarian tendencies. So did Obama. But if you use more clear language,
Yeah.
then you're not going to get the same retweets and clicks because the outrage machine, the
Mm.
algorithms favor people who are hysterical on either side.
Yeah, and do you think that's all by design? Like, is a lot of this just for the media to make money? Because again,
Yeah.
CNN's
Yeah.
biggest day was
Yeah.
January 6th. Like, they just want to stir shit up. I mean, don't you think that they kind of have blood on their hands in a way? Because with like Kyle Rittenhouse and all this stuff, like they started all this, they stirred the pot on all this shit.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly the case. They definitely stirred the pot on all this shit. And secondarily, having run news businesses on these algorithms, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, it's if your algorithm is based around keeping people on a platform and keeping people engaged, well, fear is a much stronger motivator than love. And so you're going to have to appeal to the lizard brain in people rather than the frontal cortex that does all the thinking.
Hmm.
So it, by design, these algorithms keep people angry and online. And so, yeah, that's a byproduct. You go into one echo chamber or the other, and you end up in this dugout trench that says anybody who's over the hill on the other side, in that other trench over there, they're the worst people ever. And let's all get together and like, let's all confirm each other's biases and let's all be angry together. And it's really difficult as somebody who's stood in between the two trenches. You get blasted. You get blasted big time. And when I wrote the article, Kyle Rittenhouse is not a hero. He's also not a white supremacist because Joe Biden implied that he was a white supremacist. Kamala Harris implied that.
Right. Well, they also,
But
I
the
watched
entire
the
right called him
trial
hero.
and they tried to say, I mean, I don't like Kyle Rittenhouse. I'll be first to say I'm not a fan, but they tried to say he was a mass shooter. And I was like, oh,
Yeah, I mean, he
come
almost
on.
exactly.
That
Yeah.
was ridiculous.
And the amount of people after the trial who said, I thought that the guys he shot were black.
Yeah.
Because of the way that the media portrayed it. And then
Yes.
it took a trial to show the truth of the matter because
But I
the
think there's a lot of
adversarial
people
system
that
in the
still think
courtroom.
he shot black people.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I'm stuck in between. Like, number one, I saw Joseph Rosenbaum chase down Kyle Rittenhouse, scream "F you" and lunge for his weapon, and then Kyle fired 4 shots in rapid succession as he dodged around. And
Was that the one where he was falling back and
no, that was
the other guy?
Anthony Huber, who was the
Okay.
second man shot. He hit him in the head with a skateboard, and then Kyle shot him in the heart. And and this is all grisly stuff. And it's like, I was there and I tried to save Joseph Rosenbaum's life. I didn't know what his criminal past was at the time.
Sure. Well, and
And
he
so I
didn't
just,
deserve to die, obviously.
well, nobody deserves to die like that, is what I've said. But
No.
that's much to the chagrin of conservatives who, because Kyle Rittenhouse was called a white supremacist, they're saying, well, if they're going to call him this, then we're going to call him a hero. But my experience firsthand with that whole situation and with testifying in the trial, it was like I was very strong for the defense. My testimony, what I saw was advantageous to the defense insofar as I saw this guy chase after this kid who had a gun. I didn't write the laws again, but saw him chase him down. He screamed "F you." The kid was standing stationary after a gunshot went off. After running away, he turned around. The gunshot went off. He turned around and he's aiming 45 degrees to the ground. This guy continues to pursue him, screams "F you," lunges for the gun. He dodges and shoots. At the same time, I told police that I looked down at the time of the shooting because I told them I looked down. I felt something go past my legs. I was like, did I just get effing shot? And I stamped my legs and I was like, no, I'm okay. And I ran over to try to help Rosenbaum. But that part of my testimony was not good for the defense. And they wanted me to say I wasn't afraid for my life in that moment, but I was. So on the one hand, I was good for the defense. On the other, I wasn't. In Wisconsin, you can get acquitted of self-defense, but still charged with reckless endangerment of another individual, which I was a victim, named victim in that trial, and it was up to 15 years. So I knew that saying that truth, that I was scared, I was under oath, I had to say it, that could throw him in jail for years just because of my testimony, and he could be acquitted of everything else. And so I didn't want to say that, to be completely honest. I wanted the easiest path out that wasn't going to have me looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life, but the truth was the truth. And so whether it was Joseph Rosenbaum lunging or whether it was the bullet going past my legs, I was just like, yeah, this is what happened. And when I wrote that op-ed, Kyle Rittenhouse is not a hero. He's also not a white supremacist. It was actually the conservatives who who I lost thousands of followers, and I got plenty of threats. Look, I'm not asking for sympathy. I knew I was kicking the hornet's nest, but the mere reaction to the op-ed proved the thesis, which is that we've gone
Yes.
completely in two completely opposite directions. And I was actually there, and the two narratives are this side's missing this and this side's missing that. And when you
That's
point those things out, yeah.
well, I think you're the hero for doing that, because I don't think that's
Yeah,
kicking
right.
the hornet's nest.
I'm the idiot for following a 17-year-old with an AR-15
Well,
into
no,
a
no, no. But I'm
riot.
saying for writing that article about how that he's not a hero, but he's also not a white supremacist. Like, we need to come back to common sense and reason, and not everything is so black and white, good versus evil. Like, the truth is somewhere in the middle. I think that's
Yeah.
what we're missing, because, like I said, I think there's family members that think that I think they hate me because they think I'm a white supremacist, because they think I
Yeah.
voted for Trump or whatever. Like, it is weird. It is very, and I think there's some of that going on the right too. Like you said, they call the other side commies and all this. And so
Mhm.
there's some of that going on too, but it's such a weird time that we're living in. And I don't know how to get out of it, or if we ever will.
Well, I do think if you look at previous moments like this in American history, obviously it's different with the digitization of our discourse. But with that being said, I do think that, like, for example, the Democrat Party at some point is going to have to go back to the drawing board. If if their losing streak continues, then votes are votes. And so ultimately, I do think from this period of unrest and from the kind of destructive, creative, you can call it creative destruction. You can call it a number of things, but Trump's bull in a China shop approach to the federal government into Washington, D.C. is in the long term going to cause people on both sides of the spectrum to reassess the way that our government, quote unquote, serves its people, and to reassess the way in which, you know, you are able to impart change by taking to the streets and by going to the polls. I agree with you that, like, a lot of these protests, you're like, what is the point? You know, you're not going to get Trump impeached or thrown out of office, but um, just the mere fact that there are that many people out in the streets, not every single one of them, not even a small minority of them are paid. They're just going out there because they are mad and they want a reason to go out and protest.
Yeah, I just don't think to me, I just don't understand the purpose and the point. It's like, and I think this goes for both ways. I think the people that stand outside of those abortion clinics with the signs or whatever, I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, here's like, if you want to, you're never gonna reduce the number of abortions to zero. But if you wanted to, save a baby, why doesn't that lady, instead of spending 8 hours holding a sign, why does she spend 8 hours and go mentor a young girl? And then maybe you're going to prevent her getting pregnant and then having to have an abortion. Like, what, isn't that an idea? Like, couldn't
Yeah.
we do things that are more constructive and positive to help each other? I think, because that's ultimately what we're fighting for, right? Is the betterment of a mankind and better things for everybody. So wouldn't that be a better use of time?
I think that'd be an ideal situation. It
How do
just so
we
happens that,
promote that? How do we
yeah,
make that go viral? Like, no, see, no
well,
one's going to watch this interview. This will get like 20 views, but like, if I light myself on fire right now, we would get freaking amazing.
yeah, that's not a bad idea.
Okay.
No, you're right. And it is, it's the people who are, throwing bombs, giving these hot takes on Twitter and stuff. Those are the ones who get retweeted and go viral. So it's like a common sense take is not going to go viral. Although my op-ed did get millions of clicks, but it it was the hate
People
click.
that hate
So,
you, right?
yeah, exactly. So yeah, and Joseph Rosenbaum committed all kinds of crimes over the course of his life, specifically sexual assault of minors, which is a reprehensible and completely inexcusable crime. Now, when I cite this fact, I get a lot of, hey, well, you're trying to justify it. I'm not, but I've spent years trying to figure out why all this stuff happened. And you can't ignore the fact that Joseph Rosenbaum, who committed those crimes, was sexually assaulted by his stepdad at age 13. And the kids that he sexually assaulted, some of them are in jail for the same crimes. Kyle Rittenhouse's dad, the only time that he was present, he obviously let his 17-year-old son go out to a riot with an AR-15, which no well-built conservative family is going to do that. But the only time that he was present was leaving drunken messages on Kyle's lawyer's answering machine, and or at least that's the only thing I've been able to gather as far as his participation in the whole thing.
I didn't even know
So
this.
his
This is
father is
so interesting, though.
yeah. So his dad is an absent drunk. Anthony Huber, who was shot in the heart, who hit Kyle in the head with a skateboard, his dad was absent, and he used skateboard as his only solace, and that's what he tried to use to hit Kyle Rittenhouse before he was shot. And Gage Groskowitz, absent father, who was the third man shot, his bicep was shot off. I saw him in the hospital right after I dropped off Rosenbaum. He had an absent father. And then also Jacob Blake, the man who started all of the riots when, the riots started when he was shot by police. And Joe Biden and Kamala Harris said he was shot 7 times in the back in front of his family. Well, Jacob Blake had a warrant out for his arrest for assaulting his baby mama. His baby mama called the police, said, "My kids are here and Jacob Blake is back and I feel threatened." And with the warrant out for his arrest, the police arrived. The video that went viral showed Blake just jumping out of the police's grasp, and he was shot 4 times in the back and 3 times in the side. His kids were in the car, but those are the kids that their mom had just called the police saying this guy is, a danger to my family. And he was armed with a knife. And what the video doesn't show is that he was tased twice before the video picks up. So the police tased him twice. He's armed with a knife. He's trying to get into the car where the kids are, where a police call with a warrant out for his arrest was just made saying, "I'm afraid for my safety and my kid's safety." And that Jacob Blake, his dad only came out of the woodwork to sue the city, to sue the police department for the fact that his son was shot, but he wasn't there for the entire 20 some odd years of his life before that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is my thing is like, I just feel like, and it's the same with the school shootings and stuff. I just feel like we're not getting to the root cause. I was a school counselor for 17 years. I worked with kids. I worked with these families. I work with rich families and poor families, families of all different backgrounds and races and all this stuff. But you're right. Like that is a huge factor. A lot of the kids that I've worked with that were struggling, it was from a single parent household. And I'm not saying all single parents are bad, so don't
I know
at me or whatever.
Exactly.
There's some single moms that are just absolutely amazing. There's some single fathers that are amazing, but it does put a burden on the kid and it makes things harder. And some kids can handle it and some can't.
Yeah.
Some kids really struggle.
Yeah. And
that is something to talk about.
Exactly. It's not to say that a kid can't have a single parent and not succeed. It's not like they're not going to succeed.
No.
But with that being said, when you have the divorce rates being what they have been for the last 30 years, you have an entire generation of people who millions and millions of them did face these challenges, and that's going to have an outsized impact on the way in which those people conduct themselves in their future when you have it repeated over millions and millions of times.
Yeah, and do you think it's interesting because we publicly shame racism, rightfully so. If people are racist, we publicly shame them. That is so terribly. And I think we used to shame people for being, a single parent. Oh, that kid's a bastard. It's a horror. And then I feel like there was this shift in the 90s. Like I remember this as a kid, the Murphy Brown episode where she had a kid and George Bush was saying, Murphy Brown doesn't have any morals. And everyone's going, oh, George Bush, you old fogey. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. And now I look back at that and I go, I think he was right, though. I think he might've been right.
Yeah. And it's like you were saying, you can have compassion for people in those circumstances. And also, identify the fact that parents should sacrifice some degree of their personal happiness. It shouldn't just be like, oh, we hit some hardship and, because, whatever, it's hard between my spouse and I, my personal happiness is really important. And our society has become more and more focused on personal happiness as opposed to the preservation of the family unit or the building up of community. And so because of that,
or just be like me,
quite the contrary, it's a celebration.
Kids. You can just not have kids if you don't want to. If you don't want to.
And now I'm powerful, and now everybody will celebrate me. Whereas if you're a stable home, it's like that's not worth celebrating.
Right? Yeah. I mean, I don't think. I don't know. Shaming and judging. It's not the greatest technique, but I'm just saying, like, there's something that is an issue that I think that needs to be talked about and looked about.
Mhm.
And I don't know what the solution is. Again, I don't know that public shaming. I don't know that necessarily these single parents we should force. We're not going to force them to get remarried, obviously, or whatever. But I mean, it's just something that we should talk about. That this
Mhm.
is an issue. And again, I think with kids and mental health, the kids' mental health in this country is it's just the anxiety and depression problems are going through the roof. And I think a lot of it
Yeah,
too is with social media. Like I feel like all this stuff ties in. I think we're
it
on social
does.
media too
Yeah.
much. I think that
Mhm.
there's lack of connection, real connection with your family and with your neighbors and with your friends, not on social media. Because I think social media, there has its place. Obviously, like the technology allows us, you and I, to have this conversation now, but this is more real. Whereas like interacting, if I like your tweet or whatever, that's not the same. It's not the real world.
Yeah. I still coach the Georgetown hockey team, and to see the extent they're more worried about their digital reputation than their real world self. And
Really?
additionally, like if you're on these social media platforms, you're seeing every billionaire, every celebrity. Not only are you seeing like how they actually live and how privileged their lives are and how much money they have and the trips and all that, but those celebrities are also putting filters on all their content and only showing you the best aspects of their lives. They're not showing you, the more difficult things that they're facing. And so you have a bombardment with not only like everybody that's doing better than you and everybody that has better circumstances, the grass is greener, but also you can go on Twitter and have, watch a guy get punched in the head in some fight, or somebody get stabbed and killed before you even have your morning coffee. And so like yeah, that kind of stuff, we're just hyper aware of every rich person in their lives and also every bad thing that happens in our country. And it just has a very negative force on people being more concerned with their own lives and with, not looking over their neighbor's fence and seeing how much better they have it than they do. It's like you can no longer hide from that. You can no longer just be in um, your own small town community and be happy with what you got.
Yeah. Do you think some of it with the protests and especially with the race stuff? Because to me, it was just it kind of came out of left field. I understand there was some police things that, rightfully so. Some of these people were being killed by the police, and the police were they were going too far with. Obviously, that's I mean, there's video footage of this.
Yeah.
But it also seems like the media threw fuel on this fire, and it was kind of this divide and conquer thing because
Yeah.
I think in 2008, 2009 ish, there was the Occupy Wall Street, and then there
Yeah.
was the Tea Party. And so the Tea
Yep.
Party was saying, they're taking too much money in the taxes, and the Occupy Wall Street was saying Wall Street's, not paying enough. Like if
Mhm.
those two forces had combined, and instead
Well,
we all grabbed together and we looked up
and
at the
yeah,
top and all the rich people, I think we could have done some real damage
in
together.
some ways they did. I think, well, there were a lot of Bernie bros who abandoned Bernie and turned to Trump, or a lot of Obama voters who voted for Trump precisely because he was running on a populist message that, yeah, had a lot in common with the Tea Party, but also with Occupy as far as, um, you know, it gets more complicated with Trump, obviously, because he's a billionaire himself. But at the same time, he came from that system, and he was then looking um, as an outsider, saying, there's that classic moment in the debates where Hillary was like, Donald Trump like cheats more on his taxes than anybody else, and he's like, yeah, that's why I'm the best person to know how bad it is, because I just played the game and I know
Yeah,
how the game is played.
right.
And so, yeah, I did it because that's what
Yeah,
your
I'm
system
smart.
that you
Yeah,
created allowed me to do.
I'm smart if I use the system.
Yeah, I'm
Right.
smart, is what
Yeah.
he said.
Is
Yeah.
what, yeah. I mean, it is interesting because you kind of wonder with Musk and Trump, they get labeled as, oh, these are the evil billionaires. And like I said earlier, the left has a lot of them too, but they're a lot more
Yeah.
quiet. Like, why do you
Yeah.
think Trump and Musk are is it just because they're so vocal? And that
Yeah.
if
Oh
Musk
yeah.
just shut up, I think everybody would
Yeah, you're right.
like,
You're right. They're constantly stoking the fires, and Trump spent his entire uh career in reality TV going towards controversy and creating these spectacle fights, and using WWE and all that. And so um or
don't you think
he
too?
appeared on WWE.
He's clearly a narcissist. Like he just
Oh
wants
yeah.
I mean, I think he really wants to do a good job so that people will say how great he is. but I
Yeah.
don't know what his. I mean, because people are like, oh, he's trying to help out his billionaire buddies, and I was like, I'm trying to understand that because
No,
like
it's
that
much
doesn't make
more.
sense
I
to
mean,
me.
yeah, when I met him in 2015, that was what I picked up on was like two things. Number one, he is the kind of guy who really does want to be liked and whoever he's talking to, he wants to be the coolest guy. But also, if you compare him to like Kevin McCarthy, um, who was the Speaker of the House, like there's two kinds of schmoozers. Like one schmoozer is going to look at you in the eyes and make you feel like the biggest guy in the room, and the other one's going to be looking around for more important people who are in the room than you. And I'm at the Silent Live after party with all of these, big famous people, and Trump was looking right at me. And I don't want to give away the story because it's pretty hilarious.
Wow.
But he totally made me feel like the biggest guy in the room. So it is what it is. I'm a middle brother. I know what it's like when somebody's like manipulating you emotionally, and he pulled it off.
That's crazy. I can't wait to read that one. I'm a middle brother myself, so I
There
think
you go.
we have that in common.
Yeah, what
Do
doesn't
you,
kill you makes you stronger.
so who is your following? Like, because I'm a follower now, I'm a fan, or I'm halfway through the book. Because I think they were kind of aligned on a lot of these things. But
Hmm.
who are your followers? You said you lost a lot of conservative because of that article. So are your followers more independent, kind of moderates, or do you have followers of both from both sides?
I think, yeah. The interesting thing about the book is that after I've heard from hundreds of people who have read it, it's actually the lefties who have enjoyed, who have, I guess, taken the most away from the book,
Hmm.
because during BLM, I was out there on the ground and witnessing a lot of this violence that was happening in these power vacuums, and just talking about, here's how the right framed it, here's how the left framed it, here's how my clips were taken by the left and the right, here's who bought it, here's how much was paid for them. But all my left wing friends are like, wow, I didn't realize all that stuff. Like, because they had basically, are being told that it's a party like atmosphere and that it's mostly peaceful for that entire period. So,
The summer of
um,
love.
yeah, and so I was worried about it because it's critical of the BLM movement as far as like what it stood for versus what it actually was doing and what actually came out of it. But I think if you come at it like in the book, I'm not like, hey, I'm the guy who's going to tell you everybody's right and everybody's wrong. I'm just like, hey, I experienced this. This is where I come from. This is, where my politics were. And I'm really just wrestling over it along with the reader of like, I've been trying to figure this out for years. And it's not so much every Trump era book is like, here's why my side is right and yours is wrong. And I'm just like, hey, I was there. Here's a lens into what I experienced, and I'm still trying to figure it out. And just like the videos that I recorded on the ground, I'm going to put it out there and let you decide for yourself.
Well, yeah, because I think what happens is I'd say a majority of the people in the BLM protests are peaceful, and they are going there to just support black people's rights and to not get
Yeah,
shot by the
absolutely.
police. I think that's probably a
Yeah.
majority of the people, but there are these other people that come in and hijack it.
Yeah.
And that's the part that's confusing to me. I think the weirdest thing was just how often everyone just stood down, right? Like I'm in Arizona,
Yeah.
Scottsdale. We have a mall down. It's like literally down the street from my house, and it's like a mile away. It's the mall that my girlfriend, she grew up here, and they completely looted it and destroyed it and wrecked it. And what's his name? Fucking that asshole Jake Paul or whatever. I think he came to
Yeah.
videotape and stuff, and like the police just they asked. I think Trump even said like, "Hey, do you need like help?" And our stupid governor was like, "No, everything's fine." Like
Yeah.
we're like,
That's
"What
what
the
happened
fuck are you doing?"
everywhere.
Yeah,
Happened
why
in
did they just
Chaz.
stand down? What I don't
Yeah. It
understand.
happened in Chaz. It happened in Kenosha. It happened in Portland, where you had Democrat mayors and governors saying, hey, Trump, you're not going to bring your fascist police in here. We're going to basically give, 6 blocks up in Seattle to this protest movement. And what's
That
the
was
first thing they did was,
insane. They took
yeah,
over
they,
the
they,
police building and everything, and
yeah,
how much
so they
damage was
abandoned the East
done.
Police Ring. Yeah, they abandoned the East Police Precinct. And what was the first thing the protesters did? They put armed
Put up
guards at the
borders.
checkpoints. Yeah, and yeah, they put
I
up
thought borders
borders.
were
They
bad. I
called
thought
them
they were
barriers,
racist.
not walls. They called them barriers.
Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
different.
It's
Okay.
totally different than a wall. That'd be too Trumpy. But
Yeah, didn't they
yeah,
sell things inside? They sold. I don't. Do you ever see Benny Johnson's video of the Chaz? Oh my god, that's like when I figured out.
yeah,
Yeah, that was hilarious. He's like,
yeah.
you can get
It's
a only $5 or something to get a hot dog.
Yeah.
So I was like, wait a minute. Yeah, I thought this was anti-capitalist. You're not supposed, it was, yeah, it's just kind of interesting. But yeah, so is there any way for us to kind of come together on a majority? I mean, obviously there's always going to be, like you said, the actual white supremacists and the actual far left communists, like they're probably going to stay in their lanes. But I would say for a majority of Americans, is there a way that we can all come together? Is there a protest that we could all do together? Because then that would be really powerful if Republicans and Democrats went to the same protest.
I think we're gonna have to wait for the Orange Man to sail into the sunset. I know there's people have a lot of questions about a third term and what would happen if that's and like
Well, he's saying
I'm
he's going to
laughing.
run as the VP with JD Vance, and then
Yeah,
Vance
I
going to
mean,
is that? I don't think that's
who
legal.
knows? Who knows? But
He's
there
just
is,
trolling, right? Is he serious? I don't know.
I don't even know at this point.
What do
I
you
really
think
don't
of
even
Trump?
know.
You met him, so I mean, what is your? Because to me, I just go, it's the same as most people. I think there's good and there's bad, but I think some
Yeah,
people think he's the savior and he's amazing and he's going to save everything, and then other people think he's a Hitler. And
yeah,
I don't think either one of those. It's the same with Rittenhouse. He's not a hero and he's not a white
yeah,
supremacist.
exactly. And everybody's like, you know, you can't do any bad in their eyes, or vice versa. And it's like, the way that I view it is, yeah, just like any other American president, which is there's going to be good things that they do, whether it's Obama, whether it's Trump, whether it's Nixon, whether it's Kennedy, or even I'm no fan of LBJ
Did
for my own
Biden do
reasons.
anything good? I mean, seriously, some people said, like Mark Hamill said, he was the best president of his lifetime.
Yeah, no, it definitely wasn't. I mean, the thing about Biden is that like, and that was the perfect example is like, oh yeah, he's totally like he's smart as a Joe Scarborough said, like he's smart as a whip, like right before he got pulled out after that debate. Um, I mean, anybody with eyes who was looking at things semi detached from their own political ideations was going to be like, yeah, this dude is losing it. I mean, you saw that during the debates in 2020. So
Yeah, because I think
it
people
wasn't even
voted
him. It
for him
was,
because
it was a whole team.
yeah, it
It
was
was a
like the
team of
Trump.
people behind him. So
There
it
was so,
wasn't even Joe Biden being the
yeah,
president because he really lost. And I say that with sympathy because I watched my dad die of degenerative brain disease. And it's something where the person themselves is actually not even aware of their degeneration. And it's a very sad thing to see. But the fact of the matter is he was getting taken advantage of by his wife and by all the people who were accessing power through him. And so they were juicing him up and telling him, you're good to go. Get out there for that debate. Obviously, he wasn't.
yeah. My condolences on your dad. I read about that in the book.
Yeah, it's
But
but I learned a lot about the challenges that he faced, and like we were talking about earlier with the family unit, I resented my parents for staying together because they fought, and every kid is going to see something something in other families that they wish they had. But after he passed away, number one, I found out like, oh, I resented my dad for being a hard ass. I found out he smuggled drugs to pay for med school, and that's why he was a hard ass because he wanted to protect us from that. And then also like I realized that all of my friends who had divorced parents, they came over to our house, even though it was always crazy and the brothers were always fighting and, our house was chaotic. It was fun because we would all sit down at the dinner table together and we'd all, have our talks and like we'd hash it out and we'd anything went at the dinner table. It was always intellectual debates and debates on politics and debates on whatever. It wasn't about whether you had the right opinion, right or left. It was about how well you could argue for your opinion at the dinner table. So it was your argument was based upon its merits rather than its virtue. And now I think everything's been flipped around.
But don't you think that's the problem? So, to me, that feels like the problem today is that, especially on social media, everyone's trying to win an argument and convince you,
Yeah.
sell you on their
Yeah.
side.
Yeah.
No one is trying to listen to the other
Exactly.
side. I am very curious, like when they feel something and I don't agree with it, I want to understand. I mean, that's why I do a podcast because I want to understand why do you think I mean, I've had super conservative, I had Ted Nugent on here 2 times, and I just had some a very liberal musician who the conservative people gave me a bunch of flack for having him on. I'm like,
Yeah.
well, but
It's
I just
true.
want to hear both sides. I think
Yeah.
it's interesting.
And that's when I'm out on the streets, I'm using my cell phone because I don't want to stick a big camera in their face. I want people to genuinely tell me what they think. I want them to, trust me to present their opinions in good faith, which I do try to do, and I try to be a fly on the wall rather than like somebody's going to shout my ideas down their throat and say, "Oh, don't you know it's illegal to smoke weed in the Capitol?" Or don't you know it's illegal to try to smash down the doors of the House floor, when the votes are being counted? Or don't you know it's illegal to try to break down the fence and burn the federal courthouse in Portland? you know, that's not my job. That's not my lane. My lane is to go out there and ask questions of these extreme people on both sides. And if you go into that, like, I'm going to win an argument with these people, you're not going to do your job, which is to ask the tough questions. So, like, you're much better off using the Socratic method with your friends who are on the opposite side of the political spectrum. Like, oh, so, you think this, but why do you think that? And then what do you think about, the fact that X, Y, and Z happened, and the people that you voted for didn't exactly do what they said they were going to do, or whatever. If you ask questions rather than try to cram your ideas down their throat, you're much more likely to get a consensus than if you do the latter.
Yeah, I just try to understand. And like I said, I do think deep down, I think we have way more in common. A lot of us want the same thing. Like, we want lower taxes. We want to not be at war with a bunch of people. We'd like to be able to have a living wage and afford healthcare and a house and a car. Or, well, I guess millennials don't want cars. They want to Uber everything. But for, majority of people, or like the way it used to, you want to be able to live your life and be left alone. You want to be able to express your religious or your, I don't know what the left, the LGBTQ philosophies. I don't know. It's not a religion, but whatever, they believe is their thing, and they want to be able to believe that and not be persecuted for it.
Yeah. And there's a strange thing going on where I think, it used to be traditionally that the right was dogmatic and set in their ways and the left was open-minded. I think we don't really it's not really very open-minded on either side right now, as far as like people, looking at things and questioning their own side as well as the greater system.
Yeah. Why do you think? But it does seem like the right is a little bit more open-minded with a lot of things. Like,
I would agree. I would agree with. I mean, working in a Daily Caller newsroom we were a lot more free to voice our own ideas and yell at each other about what we really thought about things than I was in the NBC newsroom.
Yeah, if you are labeled a conservative or MAGA, like, there are people that will blacklist you. They'll say on The View, like, if your family is MAGA, don't go to Christmas. And so,
exactly.
This is the mindset of this is real. This is in real life. There's a lot of people that have this mentality that do they want nothing to do with you if they think that you voted for Trump. I had people post on my Facebook and said, if you voted for Trump, unfriend me. It's like, so you want all your friends to be voting the same way as you? That's
it doesn't make any sense. I know. Well, I think that the positive thing is, like, we've had tougher times in American history. We did have a revolution. We had the War of 1812. We had the Civil War. Those were pretty tumultuous times. So I do think, like, that if you look on a longer timeline, if you look at what the Republican Party was in 1865 versus what it was in 1965, and if you look at what the Democratic Party was in those two time periods, it's two completely different pictures. So I do think that our political parties do ebb and flow according to what the demands of the population are. It's just like a big ship that this happens in decades and not single presidential cycles. So the ships are turning right now. We don't really know where they're going to end up, but they're turning.
Yeah. I just hope that there is this, like, smaller movement that I've noticed online. Maybe it's just because of my algorithm, but there's this thing of, like, people working out, people taking care of themselves, people, mental health, like, challenging themselves. And, because maybe it's because I follow guys like Andy Frisella and stuff. And I think, and I don't know why that's labeled like right wing. Andy Frisella is right wing, but, I think the mentality of, like, working hard and like Gary Vaynerchuk and guys like that are, like, trying to motivate people. I think there's a movement for that. And I hope that would be something that would be common for right and left wing, that people that, like I said, like the lady that wants to protest in front of the abortion clinic, like, be a mentor, do something good for the world. I wish we all had that mentality versus, like, let's go out and burn a Tesla. I don't.
Yeah.
So
man can dream.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, thank you so much for doing this. The book is out now, and then the second one is coming soon. You'll have to come back on the show and
I will
again.
I'd love to.
Thank you so much. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Every topic, one of a kind. From the rockers to the wise men.